Hi everyone, my name is Chloé Messdaghi, and today we're going to talk about hacker rights. I first want to just say a big thank you for accepting my talk, and I'm so excited to do this talk with you because it's something I'm extremely passionate about. But before I start, I just want to say that this talk is completely dedicated to all the hackers who've been scared to disclose, to all the hackers who've been prosecuted for trying to do something good, or at least they're just doing their job, and as well as to all the people who are right now fighting for the rights for hackers. So let's dive into this. So for those that do not know who I am, my name is Chloé Messdaghi. I'm the VP of Strategy over at Point3 Security. But my other job is basically being an InfoSec advocate, but also an activist. So what that means, you're maybe wondering, not only do I talk, I also take action. And that's why. I am the president and co-founder of WOSEC, which is Women of Security. I am also the founder of We Are Hackers, formerly known as Women Hackers. And also I am a podcaster for ITSP Magazine's The Uncommon Journey with Alyssa Miller and Phil Wiley. And also run a hacker book club with Angela, which we meet every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And every month we read a new book. But all the books themselves are written by people in the hacker community, and the hacker community reads it all together. And it's really cool because the author does attend, and those that are mentioned in the books do attend our sessions. That is my URL, and that is my Twitter and Instagram. So if you want to know anything about me, it's probably there. Just to let you know, one thing that is not on here is that I'm also the co-founder of Hacking Is Not a Crime, which we will dive in a little bit deeper into this conversation. But Hacking Is Not a Crime is basically, we're on a mission to change the public perception of hackers, to try to reduce the prejudice towards the hacker community so then we can get a change in legislation. And yes, we're going to talk about legislation too in this talk. So bear with me. Let's go into this. So the current landscape is a little scary for those that are in it, or this is your first time finding out about it. Thank you, because it's very hard for people to hear about what's going on in the hacker community other than what's being portrayed in the media most of the time. So I want to first talk about a couple breaches for some cases for you. So Equifax itself, as you probably remember, 147 million Americans were impacted by the breach. But did you know that a hacker, also known as a security researcher, by the way, disclosed the vulnerability that later became the reason of their breach? But remember, it was 5 to 6 months before the breach made headlines. And it was basically, in other words, the disclosure itself was ignored. Another case that we have is Capital One. So in Capital One, as you maybe remember, was that according to the federal complaint itself, the breach took place in stages across March and April 2019, but Capital One only became aware of the problem on July 17th, when a hacker tipped the company to a public GitHub that was displaying a lot like private Capital One data. And then it leads us to this one question in particular, which is, but what if no one reported the breach? In other words, the thing to understand here in this situation is that there are security researchers, hackers, that are disclosing all the time to companies. And the thing is, it's to protect companies. It's not to extort companies, because that's what attackers do. Hackers are notifying companies about the vulnerabilities, so then companies can take the initiative to fix the vulnerabilities before an attacker finds that vulnerability, takes advantage of it, and can lead to a big situation for you. But the one thing you need to understand is that 60% of researchers don't report a vulnerability. And this is a statistic that Amit El-Azhari shared with the hacker community, was that the security researchers, they're afraid of being prosecuted. And that's why only 60% do report the vulnerabilities. Another statistic came about in 2018 in HackerOne's report, stating that 1 out of 4 hackers do not report vulnerabilities because of this fear of prosecution. But also it's to be noted that those that did disclose the vulnerability, usually through social media channels, were often ignored, or it was misinterpreted in a wrong way, which ended up being threats from a company saying that they were going to send a lawsuit over. So why are hackers scared? Besides this risk of being prosecuted if you're just in good faith trying to protect organizations and the consumers. The other thing is, if companies don't have disclosure policies, hackers are then entering into a space of either being ignored, misinterpreted, but also it's really hard to find the contact information. So they'll contact via social media, which we know that on Twitter or on LinkedIn, who's handling those pages? It's not security team, it's the marketing team. So then who does the marketing then take that information to? And a lot of times companies don't have that structure or don't even have a setup to respond to disclosures through a messaging. And that's a huge issue. So for hackers, scared all the time when disclosing, because looking for contact information can be a real pain. Sometimes it takes hours to days to weeks to a point where you're like, is it even worth it? I'm already putting myself on the cutting board of something bad happening to me, but I know I need to do this to protect people. So that's why hackers are scared, is because there's all this. And then there's also, when you have vulnerability disclosure policies, sometimes the verbiage is so much that if you are an English learner, it can be very hard and challenging to understand what exactly it's talking about. Not just that, there's another problem with that, which is that most of the time, that vulnerability disclosure policies are written by attorneys for other attorneys to understand, not everyday regular people. And even though you can be in scope, and even if the policies are a-okay and it's understandable and everything like that, and you confirm everything in scope, you can still have situations like this that occurs. So in this picture, this is Kevin. And Kevin, he came across a DJI, that famous drone manufacturer. Basically, they came across their new launched bug bounty program. I want to just make note that you understand that this is self-managed. This isn't through one of those bug bounty platforms. So that itself is already letting you know that this could be a problem, because it takes a lot of energy, resources, and people to manage a bug bounty program. But anyway, let's go into the story. So for the scope itself, the bug bounty program covered all security issues in firmware, application and servers, including source code leak, security workaround, and privacy issues. And Kevin himself, he emailed the company to just reconfirm the scope that's what is listed on their page. The thing to note about it is that it took them 2 weeks to finally respond to him, just to confirm what's already published out there, that yes, in fact, that is the scope. So that's already letting you know it's not being managed properly, and it's going to take more people. So the thing to note is that Kevin did report a vulnerability, and for his findings, they wanted to give him $30,000. However, there's a catch. The contract that he would have to sign would basically offer no legal protection for him. So he walked away. What happened was that DJI saw him as a threat, a PR threat. So what they did was that they turned around and served him a legal notice saying that he himself, even though he was within scope, violated the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, CFAA, if that's the other way that you may know of it. Kevin did not know what to do, except he had all the communication from DJI. He saved it all and published it on his blog post. And, DJI did withdraw because in the internal chains, you can see that they were threatening. They saw him as a threat, and that they were deciding we should probably go after him because they thought of a big PR situation. So it's not just you have to worry about if you are a hacker on software, but also it happens to those that are hackers that are working within the physical realm. So in a sense that in September 2019, the the cybersecurity firm was hired by the Iowa State to basically conduct penetration tests to see if the staff can gain access to sensitive data or equipment. So 2 Coalfire employees found a door to the Dallas courthouse open, and when they closed the door to see if it would lock and then attempt to open it, alarm was set off. Following the protocol, they waited outside for the police to arrive with their paperwork, and initially they were told that they were good to go. However, a local sheriff showed up and said that they need to be arrested. And so they spent a night in jail, even though they were on a job. Later the charges were dropped this year, back in January. But it's one of those other examples that even if you're employed, even if you're trying to do something in good faith, you can still deal with some ramifications. Because let's be real, a lot of people don't know the difference between hackers and attackers still publicly. But overall, community consensus all believes that we need to have disclosure policies and that the current landscape is not working because the laws, how they're written right now, prevents good hacking in the same way that it's trying to prevent bad hacking. Because when it was written back in the 80s, you should note that things were very different back then. But also there was no representation there. So that is another thing to consider. But the one thing to note is that even government agencies, even private companies, and even the hacker community, and even researchers all agree we need something that we can work together and have a path of having bilateral trust amongst each other. So disclosure is a possibility to make security even better. And I know this is a scary subject for many of you, but here is a picture of a bunch of puppies. And there is a picture of a cat because I know that there are cat lovers out there. All right, let's keep going. But if you're wondering, why does the public still see hackers in a bad light? The reality is that if you turn on the TV at any time, chances are, if there's a story about a hacker, it's someone in a black hoodie in a basement. You'll see images like this every time you search on Google. For example, if you type in criminal hacker or ethical hacker, you get the exact same results. This is darkness, this hoodie, this criminal like photo-esque shoot. And it's not just the imagery, by the way, it's also the language that's being used. The thing is that the media, and if you don't know what media is, it means basically the news, marketing, and social media. But the media in general, it's not the greatest thing in the world when it comes to reporting about hacking and when it comes to the hacker community. Because the reality is that they still use the term hacker when they should be using the term attacker, cyber criminal, and so on. And because that it's become very synonymous to use hacker as what they mean by a criminal, that's why we still don't have any rights at this time. Because the public perception of a hacker community is based around what they're seeing in the media. And why is that, you're probably thinking, is because the thing is, when we're growing up, when we're looking around the world that we live in, we read, we watch things, we also have discussions. And based on what we have learned in our lifetime, we have strong beliefs about how the world works and the people that live within it. These are called socially constructed beliefs. Socially constructed beliefs is basically the idea that, for example, at a young age, you see in movies spiders are dangerous. You may have heard an adult say spiders are dangerous. You've also seen books where spiders are scary and dangerous. So if you saw a spider, you would be afraid of it. The reality of it is that imagery and language play a huge role when it comes to our memory and setting strong beliefs of how the world works. But the problem with that is that it also lets us know what to fear. And for those that have never attended any of my talks before, just note that I do talk about the brain quite often because I'm obsessed with the brain. But what I want to talk to you about is how the socially constructed beliefs then get turned into some serious issues. Because the one thing you should know about socially constructed beliefs, they're not always accurate. because there are other spiders out there that are not dangerous or poisonous, like a daddy longlegs. That's not one to be afraid of. Now, for example, if it's a black widow, hands down, definitely scary. So that's the thing is to understand is that as humans, we like to simplify things. We like to have a better understanding of how the world works through categorizing things. So then we have a better idea of how to approach these situations or these people. But the thing you need to know about is that there is this part of your brain called the amygdala, which lives within your temporal lobe, which is responsible for sensory input and turning it into meanings. So deriving meanings from images and language is one of those things that our brain does in the temporal lobe. But the thing to note is that the temporal lobe also has an emotional response center called the amygdala. And the amygdala is completely subconscious, but it's like it's very small size. It's the shape of an almond. But basically, that itself is your survival mechanism. You may have heard of it as the fight versus flight mechanism, but did you also know that it also produces the stranger danger element? So who's like me, who's not like me? And remember those socially constructed beliefs? That helps sort out who's like me, who's not like me. And this is where we're going to dive into this. So I'm going to give you an example. So imagine when you were little, whenever you turn on the TV, someone with pink hair was always the criminal. Anytime that you opened a book, the person with the pink hair you knew was probably going to be the criminal. So much that anytime that you saw someone with the pink hair, you might walk a little bit faster, you might cross the street, you might go in a store, or better yet, you'll just snag your purse or bag a little bit closer because anytime you see someone with pink hair, you're just assuming they're more likely to be a criminal because they're not like you, but also because your socially constructed beliefs is that people with pink hair are dangerous individuals because you've seen it in movies, you've read it in books, you've been told by other people. And this could be directly or indirectly through images. And so, say for example, you're walking down the street. And when you're walking down the street, someone with pink hair is behind you. Now, at this point, your amygdala is sending a warning, saying, warning, warning, someone with pink hair is behind you. Take action. So then it goes into the next part. So the amygdala sounds off an alarm, and it goes straight to the prefrontal cortex of your brain that acts like the CEO part of your brain. But it's the one part of your brain that actually uses logic and rationale to really make decisions. So what happens is when the amygdala sends that message to the prefrontal cortex then decides whether or not to take action. And by action, it's sending a message back to the amygdala whether or not to go ahead with the panic or it's not a panic. But this is completely conscious now at this point. So going back to our example of the person with the pink hair. The person with the pink hair is behind you. The amygdala sends you a warning saying, warning, warning, person with pink hair is behind you, take action. Prefrontal cortex then thinks of different scenarios. Well, I can cross the street, I can hold my bag a little bit closer, I can walk into a store. Those are the options I have to take. But the one thing you need to understand is usually in the past, probably this person would have definitely done one of those three actions and sending the message back to amygdala to react. But the thing you need to note is that there is something that you should know, is that this is the only time that you can challenge those socially constructed beliefs. And one way that we have seen in research is that the best way how to challenge beliefs is hearing personal stories. That's right. It sounds so simple, right? But basically what we need to understand is that, say, for example, you're on YouTube and you came across a person with pink hair sharing their story. And in their story, they're telling you with their face how painful it is to be someone with pink hair and how hard it is for their life because having pink hair was something that they cannot change. And it's one of those things that has caused them to have some severe issues of not having equal access to things, but also that every single time they're walking down the street, people think that they're a criminal. And they talk about how when they see people clutching their bag or crossing the street or going into a store, it reinforces that the fear is still there and that they're not listening to see what their actions are doing to this person. So say, for example, that you saw that video. And so when you're back in that scenario, right, we're walking down the street, person with pink hair is behind you, amygdala sends a message to the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is like, I have three choices. I can clutch my bag, I can cross the street, or I can walk into a store. A new one shows up, and it's like a reminder. Hey, remember that video that you saw on YouTube of that person with the pink hair and how much it hurt the person with the pink hair that every time they're walking down the street and someone without pink hair usually, crosses the street, clutches their bag, or goes in the store because they're always seen as a criminal, when in reality, the only difference between you and that person with pink hair is that they just have pink hair. At the end of the day, it's just pink hair. Nothing else. Nothing more. Nothing. It's just pink hair. And at that moment, you're now making a decision. What do you do? And for those that practice empathy and feel comfortable with understanding it's okay to be wrong, you are more likely to pick the option of not to take action and to send a signal back to the amygdala to calm down. So what is this important to know about, if you're wondering? Well, the thing is that the public in general has a belief of hackers. They believe that we're criminals. They believe that we are out to get them, that we're devious. Because the reality of it is that most people around this world has never met a hacker before. So they're basing their socially constructed beliefs from what they're seeing in the media. And laws today don't help either, because laws are the reason why we're set in stone of not having rights or being able to voice opinions as much. And so this is one of those things we have to understand, is that every human being has the ability to have that conscious decision whether or not to practice stereotypes and biases in this lifetime. But the only way that we can do that is if we get outside our comfort bubble and realize it's okay to be wrong. And as humans, we hate that. But in reality, we need to understand that if we don't do that, we make other people hurt. And we are responsible for their hurt and their pain. So now we talked about the brain a little bit. But the one thing you need to understand is because of these socially constructed beliefs and the way that humans process information and create these situations, it's the reason why 94% of the Forbes global companies don't have a disclosure policies. Also, that 60% of hackers don't report vulnerabilities because they're seen as criminals. And like I said, it's usually ignored or misinterpreted as well if they do report it. Also, the laws that were created, it never took in representation of the hacker community. And we'll dive into that in a bit. But these laws are preventing good hacking the same way that they were trying to just block bad hacking, because they didn't know there's a difference. Because most of the population doesn't know that there's a difference. They think of it all the same. But also the prosecution of hackers when they're trying to do something in good faith to protect you and I and the people that we love, is that they're still facing prosecution. And this is by local, by state, but especially private companies. But also because of the situation, how the laws are and the hacker community is that it also has increased and basically has a situation where those that are attackers, the reason they are attackers is because, one, the pay, but second, because why should they be a hacker at the end of the day? If everyone in the world sees them as a bad actor, there's no way of changing that. And that is one of the reasons why we have so many attackers in the world, is because we haven't figured out a way how to have better representation of the hacker community and policies to really impact a change, but also to note that because of the situation that they're in, it's not really giving them a reason to be on the good side sometimes because of that. So we're going to dive into some worldwide legislation, because I have talked a little bit here and there about why legislation is really bad right now. But all around the world, you can find anti-hacking laws, anti-circumvention laws, and also acceptable use policies. I know this is US centric, but please note that it was the US that set the scene for what the world now has when it comes to legislation in the hacker world, in a sense. So I want to first talk about the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, and I'm just going to touch on it very lightly because we'll get into a little bit more in depth next. But the one thing you need to understand is that this law prohibits accessing a computer without authorization or in excess of authorization. And this is usually used when a hacker goes out of scope. But it's usually, most of the time, this is what is used to prosecute hacking. A random fact that you should note about is that the CFA, how it was created, was because Ronald Reagan, he watched the movie War Games and panicked and said, we need to do something about these hackers. And there was no representation clearly when this was written because it would be very different. Not just that, but the CFA itself does not even mention hacking or hacker in it. So just keep that in mind. Now, anti-circumvention laws, basically the right to repair, reverse engineering is seen as a breach to property, to companies. Now, in the US, we haven't really seen too many cases around the DMCA being used against hackers. And to my knowledge, I don't know of any cases, to be real with you. But the one you need to understand is that it does provide a chilling effect. But the CFA is the most important one that we need to work on together to change. But the one thing I want you to understand is if you look at the years that they were created, so 1984 and 1998, that wasn't even like Y2K didn't even happen yet. The internet as we know of didn't happen yet. So clearly things are definitely out of date. And without proper representation, there's no voice being heard. And so legislation is then written for parties that are impacted by it couldn't have a say, or at least let them know that this would cause this problem. Now, acceptable use policy, let's just dive into this one question, which is, have you guys actually read your terms and conditions? Say, for example, an Apple product. Yeah, I tried. It's 50 pages long. One of the one I tried to write, it was 50 pages long. And it was definitely written for attorneys, for other attorneys to understand it. It wasn't written for an English learner. And that's the problem that we're facing, is that acceptable use policies are like, they need to be more simplified because you need to understand that the hacker community itself, not everyone is an English speaker. And because of that, then you get miscommunication issues later on. So it's really important is that we get as specific as possible and to recognize the people that actually need to know about the acceptable use policy and understand it. It needs to be better written. Now, the thing I really wanted to take away from that last slide is just, is that laws prevent good hacking in the same way that they prevent bad hacking. And we need really good hacking at this time. We always do. Now, I want to talk a little bit further about CFA. So I know the thing is that there are a lot of people in our community in cybersecurity that don't know about the CFA, but you need to know about it because it's really important. So the Computer Fraud Abuse Act was passed in 1984, is wildly outdated, first of all, and then it offers prosecutors discretion to threaten huge potential fines and jail sentences for relatively underserving violations of the computer policy. Now, first, the CFA, as written, punishes exceeding authorized access to a protected computer, a phrase vague enough to inspire some really broad interpretations. Another flaw in the CFA is the redundant provisions that enable a person to be punished multiple times for the exact same crime. These charges can be stacked one on top of another, resulting in extremely high cumulative fines and jail time for the exact same violation. This also allows prosecutors to bully defendants into accepting a deal in order to avoid facing a multitude of charges from a single solitary act. It also plays a significant role in sentencing. The ambiguity of a provision meant to toughen sentencing for repeat offenders of CFA may in fact make it possible for defendants to be sentenced based on what should be prior convictions, but were nothing more than multiple convictions for the same crime. But the most important thing to also note on here is that the CFA gives companies the right to sue. And hackers have a lot to fear about companies than the Justice Department. Now, as you see there, there's an example for Aaron Swartz's case. This is one of those cases that is extremely heartbreaking, and we need to talk about it. Because the thing is, this is an example of how the CFA has hurt people. And not just hurt people, but their families as well. And for those that don't know Aaron Swartz, it's time that you do. So back in 2011, Carmen Ortez, the U.S. Attorney's Office, charged Swartz with hacking into the MIT computer network to download millions of scholarly articles from JSTOR. Originally, this was an act of civil disobedience that was meant to protest the restricted access to research funded by taxpayers. But for this, the U.S. Attorney decided to bring charges that carried a maximum penalty of 35 years in prison for him. I want you to pause there. 35 years in prison. Did you know a first-degree murder is a minimum of 25 years in prison? But yet he was facing 35 years in prison for one act of disobedience. Not like he hurt anyone. Not just that, but also he was facing $1 million in fines. And the reason they were able to charge such years because the way CFA is written. And the issues that have yet to be sorted since it was made into law. Remember that stack upon stack for one crime? That's the issue. But the thing you need to understand is the human part of this, which is that basically he was dealing with a 17-month legal battle. And there was no end in sight at all. And through source perspective, it must have been so overwhelming. And unfortunately, because of the overwhelming and what was happening to him and being basically used as an example to prosecute someone, because that's what Carmen Ortez did, was use him as an example to scare others. He was found dead in his apartment. He actually hung himself on January 11, 2013. And following his death itself, the federal prosecutors did withdraw the charges, but his family still says that it was the government's prosecution that contributed to his decision to take his own life. So the thing to note about is because his story really impacted so many people in the hacker community, and legislators started to figure out, how do we fix this so we don't have another case like Aaron? So Aaron's Law was created, but I just want to state that it didn't pass. Unfortunately, there are a good number of lobbyists out there for some major companies, especially tech companies, that didn't want to see this get passed. Because Aaron Law, what it would have done was remove the phrase exceeds authorized access and replace it with access without authorization, which is defined as to obtain information on a computer that the accessor lacks authorization to obtain by knowingly circumventing technological or physical measures designed to prevent unauthorized individuals from obtaining that information. Now, the one thing I want to talk about is that even though Aaron Law didn't pass, we still have hope that there's a future that we can do something about this. But I just quickly want to just talk about the DMCA here, because the one thing to know about this is that it does provide a chilling effect for the hacker community. But note that I still to this day don't know of a case of a hacker being prosecuted just only under the DMCA. So please keep that in mind. But what I want to tell you guys is that what it was kind of meant to do was basically it was supposed to allow game developers, music and film companies, and others to keep a tight control on how consumers use their copyrighted works or materials, and in some ways to prevent it in some cases from making copies of their purchased products for their own use, or from jailbreaking smartphones and other devices to use them in ways the manufacturer disliked. So the one thing you need to know is that you just need to understand that this itself is something we always need to be afraid of, because copyright laws right now, it does it does play a role, especially when you're trying to reverse engineer things, because companies do see it as a breach to their property because you're using it for a different purpose or a purpose that they didn't agree to. Now, the one thing that I want to say is that with improvements to legislation, this could help the hacker community in so many different ways. And these are all the reasons why legislation improvements, what it could do for us as the hacker, but just imagine how much more secure we could all be if we allowed vulnerability disclosures to happen and we build that bilateral trust. Because it would be amazing to prevent so many breaches and also to reduce all these vulnerabilities that attackers are taking a hold of and using for ill intent purposes. I think it's time that we start working with the everyday heroes behind the scenes. Because in the reality of it is that we need to actually change the public perception of the hacker community, because those socially constructed beliefs provided by the media has not helped our community. If anything, it also started up legislation that is really impacting us and reduces having a more secure world that we live in. So we need to change the public perception of who is a hacker and what we do. And how we do that is that we have to work with organizations, media, and legislation. To be able to have hacker rights, we have to work with all three groups. We need the media to push for a public perception to change of what is a hacker, what we do, and start using the correct terminology. Also use better imagery that represents our actual community. But also the media itself, it also puts a little pressure on organizations to have disclosure policies, because they start noticing, oh no, these people aren't criminals. They're really good people. They're hackers. They're the everyday heroes. And in order to ever change legislation, just in period, you need the media and organizations to get involved for legislation to happen. So in general, we need to change how the public perceives the hacker community. Now, how do we get there? I may need your help. But the first things first is that these are the 5 needs that we need to have. We need to change the language and imagery portrayed by the media. We also need to work with them. They are our buddies. They are our change agents. And majority of times when we talk to the press, they don't know the difference between the two parties. So it's always good to let them know the differences, because they don't know most of the time. Also, we need this society to notice who we are and hear our personal stories to change their perceptions of who we are. So then we reduce their fear towards us, instead start seeing us as people just like them. People that want a better world, want a better life, want to be safe, want to make sure that they have privacy and protection too. And we need representatives to step up, because we have a lot of representatives that aren't really familiar with the hacker community. So it's important that we push for representation. So let's go into the first thing. So the first step that you can do right now at this time is that link right there is a petition for you to sign. This gives recognition that there is a problem, and this is how we fix the problem. But basically, it's a petition to get the media to understand that we need protection at this point. Hackers need rights. We need an organization to have disclosure policies. We need also our own government to see that we are a must-have, and you need to protect us in return, because it cannot keep going where, we help you behind closed doors, or we go to your events and do these hack at the Pentagon to look cool and everything, when in reality, there's still no changes being done on legislation. It's unfair, and we become a marketing commodity. And that's not what we are about. We need protection. We need to feel okay that we can do the work that we do and still be able to come home to our families. And we also need the hacker community to step up and agree that they will not go out of scope without permission, because when one of us steps out of the line, it makes it harder for all of us, because that trust is so thin. But you can also take initiative by going to hackingisnotacrime.org to get a better understanding of this entire talk, but also what are the actions that you can do to go about making a change with us. It's a grassroots effort, basically a one-stop shop to know of everything that we can do at this moment, organizations that are wanting to partner to try to bring about our rights, to bring about a change. The second step you can do is anytime the press does mention about the hacker community and they state it in a way that's wrong, correct them, but be kind. You have to understand they don't know better. So it's always nice is to start off a kind conversation. You can also send letters to the copy desk of any major publisher to let them know that, hey, you've been reporting a lot about the hacker community, but the thing you need to understand is there's a difference between attackers and hackers. Please get it right because how you're portraying us out there in the media is really affecting us because we're not able to get rights until public perception changes. The third step you can do is to talk to your organization and make sure they have a disclosure policy set. And if they don't, check out disclose.io. It's really important that you do because disclosure policies help bring a bridge for hackers to report vulnerabilities to prevent attackers from taking advantage of the situation. So you are aware of the vulnerabilities because there's definitely be times where our security teams are not going to catch every single bug out there. So that's why we have to utilize the community in a way that is beneficial for everyone. But also, if you're an organization itself that want hackers to be cared for and respected, then partner with us at Hacking is Not a Crime. We have companies that are partnering with us. And it's an amazing thing when you have companies that come to you and are like, we want to help. We love the hacker community. How can we help? And that's the greatest thing ever because it's going to take all of us to come together to push for change at this time. The fourth step is knowing who your local representative is and contacting them, setting up a meeting, but don't do it alone. Always connect me with them and I will help you in that meeting. It's so important that we talk to our local representatives and know who our local representatives are because our local representatives gives us a voice. But it's important to note is that the goal isn't to get them to agree with us or to push our own agenda. The goal is to listen to what is the things that they want to fix, the things that they're passionate about, and how us as the hacker community can help them. Finding that common ground is the most powerful thing you can do to get a legislator to hear your story and to hear you out. And last but not least, it's really important at this time that you follow the Van Buren versus U.S. Case. This is the first time in a very long time that the CFA is going to be revisited on November 30th. But basically the one you need to understand is that under this expansive interpretation of the CFA being used in this case, it become a federal crime anytime a person violates a website's terms of services. If violating terms of services is a crime, private companies then get to decide who goes to prison and for what, which puts us all at risk for everyday online behavior. It is so important to keep an eye on this case. November 30th, do not forget, we need you. And if you want to help us try to talk to legislators about this case, reach out, let's do this together. And the last step I would have to say is support organizations that are pushing for hacker rights, such as I Am the Cavalry, Disclose.io, CertCC, EFF, and CTI League. These are all wonderful organizations in the hacker community or are part of the hacker community that are trying to bring about a change or to at least give us some rights at this time or give us a voice because that's what we need. We need to have our voice out there and be heard without having to worry about being prosecuted. So the main takeaways is that we deserve rights. Hackers deserve rights and protection. Now, how we get there, we need public perception to change. We need to challenge the socially constructed beliefs from the public. And we need to work together to change that. And it's so important that that petition is signed and shared with everyone you know. It could be friends, families, but anyone who believes that they want better security. They want their data to be more protected than ever before. That's what we need. We need everyday people to be part of this fight too. And most importantly, I just want to end this one thing, which is please do not forget that change starts with you and me. It is a battle, but we can win this battle by rolling up our sleeves and not giving up. We have to, because now we're at a point in our community that we don't have a choice anymore. We're tired of our friends being prosecuted when they're trying to do something good. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for existing to this conversation. No, you're not alone. And I'm here to help you out. And know that I'm going to do whatever I can with Hacking is Not a Crime to change where we are, and you can get involved too. So thank you guys so much for existing. Stay safe, wear a mask, and thank you again for having me give this talk.